Good morning, this is Mrs. Cruz, and in this video we are going to be finishing Tuesday's task, which is going to be to read pages 8 through 14 of chapter 7 and to answer text minute question number 2. If you watched the videos yesterday, we answered question number 1, what lesson does Uncle Hammer teach Stacy and why? So we learned a few things that Stacy ended up doing with his coat, which is he ended up giving his coat to TJ, kind of getting fooled by him. So Uncle Hammer basically lets Stacy know, like, now that's TJ's coat, and hope you learn your lesson from that, right? So as we mentioned, today the goal is going to be to read to page 14. So I'm going to start setting up at page 14. And we're on page 13. There's page 13, and this is page 14. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this bright green. Okay, the questions that we're looking for right now are, what challenges did Mr. Morrison face in the past? And if there's anything important that Mr. Logan teaches Stacy about Jeremy. I know that yesterday we did leave off on talking about Mr. Morrison, so we'll see if we find out any other details. But I remember that we said that someone, he hasn't mentioned who they is, came down on them like ghosts of Christmas 76, and he lived during a time where being free was just as difficult as being a slave if you were black. So I'm going to take over with this highlighting because we know we have to start here. Okay, so let's get started on the reading. That night they come. I can remember just as good. It was cold, so cold. We had a huddle all against each other, just trying to keep warm. And 2 boys, about 18 or 19, I reckon, come knocking on my daddy's door. They was scared, clean out of their heads with fright. They'd just come back from Shreveport. Some white woman done accused them of molesting her, and they didn't know where to run, so they come to my daddy's because he had a good head, and he was bigger than me. He was strong too, so strong he could break a man's leg easy as if he was snapping a twig. I'd seen him do it that night, and the white folks was scared of him. My daddy didn't hardly have time to finish hearing them boy's story when them devilish nightmen swept down. Okay, so before we go on, now we know who the they was. Because I know that we were reading that he said some they came down like ghosts, so now we know they was white men. Okay, so we know that part of the difficulties that he was facing growing up was that it was really cold. They were just sleeping really closely together because they were just trying to keep warm. And then we know that these men were accused of molesting a white lady. But when it comes to personally Mr. Morrison, the difficulty that he faces is that they show up to his home, right? The white men. Nightmen, I echoed in a shrill, dry whisper. Stacy, sitting beside me on the floor, stiffened. Christopher John nudged me knowingly. The little man leaned forward on Papa's lap. David, Mama started, but Papa folded her slender hand in his and said quietly, these are things they need to hear, baby. It's their history. Mama sat back, her hand still in Papa's, her eyes wary, but Mr. Morrison seemed not to have noticed. Swept down like locusts, he continued in a faraway voice, burst in on us with their rebel sabers, hacking and killing, burying us out, didn't care who they killed. We weren't nothing to them, no better than dogs, killed babies and old women, didn't matter. He gazed into the fire. My sisters got killed in the fire, but my mama got me out. His voice faded and he touched the scars on his neck. She tried to get back into the house to save the girls, but she couldn't. The nightman was all over her, and she just threw me like I was a ball, hard as she could, trying to get me away from them. Then she fought like a wild thing right beside my daddy. They was both of them from breeded stock, and they was strong like bulls. Breeded stock? I asked. What's that? Cassie, don't interrupt Mr. Morrison, said Mama. But Mr. Morrison turned from the fire and explained, well, Cassie, during slavery, there were some farms that mated folks like animals to produce more slaves. Breeding slaves brought a lot of money for them slave owners, especially after the government said they couldn't bring no more slaves from Africa. And they produced all kinds of slaves to sell on the block. And folks with enough money, white men and even free black men, could buy exactly what they want. My folks was bred for strength, like they folks and grandfolks before them. Didn't matter none that what they thought about the idea. Didn't nobody care. Okay, so let's take a few more moments to highlight a few ideas. So difficulties that he faces. So we see that he's remembering the time where they killed them. This whole section is basically saying the way that they killed them and it didn't matter to them. They weren't anything better than dogs. He's also reminding them of how he got saved, but his sisters weren't so lucky. And then he also had to see that his mom and dad fought with all their might. Okay, and then the fact that he knows his parents were bred. He said, my folks was bred for strength. So that's a challenge, right? Because his family comes from having to have been slaves. Okay, let's keep going. But my mom and daddy, they loved each other, and they loved us children, and at Christmas they fought them demons out of hell like avenging angels of the Lord. He turned back toward the fire and grew very quiet. Then he raised his head and looked at us. They died that night. Them night men killed them. Some folks tell me I can't remember what happened that Christmas. I weren't hardly 6 years old, but I remembers all right. I makes myself remember. So as we go, I should start highlighting too. He grew silent again and no one spoke. Big Ma poked absently at the red-eye logs with the poker, but no one else stirred. Finally, Mr. Morrison stood, wished us a good night, and left. Uncle Hammer stood also. Guess I'll turn in too. It's near 1 o'clock. Wait a while, Hammer, said Big Ma. Now you and David both home, I gotta talk to y'all about the land. Visions of nightmen and fire mixed in the cauldron of fear awakened me long before dawn. Automatically, I rolled toward the comforting presence of Big Ma, but she was not beside me. A soft light crept under the door from Mama and Papa's room, and I immediately hurried toward it. As I opened the door and stepped into the shadowy room, it was lit now only by the flickering yellow of the low fire. Big Mom was saying, y'all start messing with these folks down here, no telling what'll happen. Is it better just to sit back and complain about how they do us? Mama snapped, her voice rising. Everybody from Smelling's Creek to Strawberry knows it was them. But what do we do about it? We line their pockets with a few pennies and send our children up to their store to learn things they've got no business learning. The older children are drinking regularly there now, even though they don't have any money to pay, and the Wallaces are simply adding the liquor charges to the family bill. Just more money for them as they ruin our young people. As I see it, the least we can do is stop shopping there. It may not be real justice, but it'll hurt them, and we'll have done something. Mr. Turner and the Averys and the Langyers and over 24 other families, and perhaps more, say they'll think about not shopping there if they can get credit somewhere else. We owe it to the Berries. Frankly, interrupted Uncle Hammer, I'd rather burn them out myself. Hammer, you go to burning and we'll have nothing, Mama retorted. Ain't gonna have nothing, no way, replied Uncle Hammer. You think by shopping at Vicksburg you're gonna drive them Wallaces out? Then you got no idea of how things work here. You were getting Harlan Granger backs that store. Mary, child, Hammer's right, Big Ma said. I'm doing what I told y'all about this land because I don't want some legal thing to come up after I'm gone that let Harlan Granger get this place. But we go backing folks credit with our land, we'd lose it for sure. And we do that, I couldn't face Paul Edward. I didn't say we should back it, Mama said, but we're just about the only family with any collateral at all. Papa looked up from the fire. That may be, honey, but we put up this land to back this thing, and it'll be just like giving it away. Times like they are, it ain't likely that any of these people can pay their bills they make, as much as they might mean to, and if they can't pay back, where would we be? We've got no cash to pay other folks' debt. He shook his head. No, we'll have to find another way. Go to Vicksburg, maybe, and see what we can arrange. His eyes fell upon the shadows, and he leaned forward. Cassie? What is it, sugar? Nothing, Papa, I mumbled. I just woke up, that's all. Mama started to rise me, but Papa motioned her down and got up himself. Escorting me back to bed, he said gently, Got no cause for bad dreams, Cassie girl, not tonight, anyway. Papa, I said, snuggling the warm quilts as he tucked them around me. We gonna lose our land? Papa reached out softly and touched my hand, my face in the darkness. If you remember nothing else in your whole life, Cassie girl, remember this. We ain't never gonna lose this land. You believe that? Yes, Papa. Then go to bed. Go to sleep. Christmas is coming. Okay, so just a little comprehension check. You should be asking yourself, like, what did Cassie just hear as far as, like, the adult conversation goes? And we know that she's hearing them talk about avoiding shopping at the Wallace store. But a big difficulty there is the fact that most of the people go there since Mr. Wallace will give them credit, and they're not able to get credit many other places. So the whole argument becomes, where are they supposed to go if they can't get credit somewhere else? And so from reading our suggestions right here, or reading the last part, we kind of see that maybe Mama's thinking about using their land to give credit, because that's an option, right? Like if you own property, you could use that property to, like, get some money from it. Like, for example, if I own a house and I could take a loan out, and they'll just kind of charge it towards what I owe for the land. But as Papa's mentioning, that's not a really good idea for them, because a lot of these people aren't able to make much money since they're sharecroppers. And if you guys remember from the video I posted about sharecropping, you get in a really hard position because you don't own the land. You have to pay for it. The supplies that you use, you have to pay your share of crops because you're farming on someone else's land. So a lot of times after you sell your crops and everything, you don't really make any money, and sometimes you end up even owing money to the people who own the land. So as Papa's saying, is like, it's not a good idea to to use their lands, because the people that they're trying to help might not be able to pay them back, even if it's like they're not trying to be rude, but that's just a reality. Okay, let's keep reading a little bit more before part 2. Now it's Christmas time, right? Books, cried little man on Christmas morning. For Stacy there was the Count of Monte Cristo, for me the Three Musketeers, and for Christopher John and little man 2 volumes of Aesop's Fables. On the inside cover of each book, in Mama's fine hand, was written the name of the owner. Mine read, "This book is a property of Miss Cassie Deborah Logan. Christmas, 1933. Man sold them books told me that these 2 was written by a black man," Papa said, opening my book and pointing to a picture of a man in a long fancy coat and a wig full of curly hair that fell to his shoulders. Name of Alexander Dumas, a French fellow. His daddy was a mulatto, and his grandma was a slave down on one of them islands. Martinique, it says here. Man said to me, "They write hard reading for children," but I told him, "He don't know my babies. They can't read them now," I said, "but they'll grow into them." In addition to the books, there was a sock full of once-a-year store-bought licorice, oranges, and bananas for each of us, And from Uncle Hammer, a dress and a sweater for me, and a sweater and a pair of pants each for Christopher John and Little Man. But nothing compared to the books. Little Man, who treasured clothes above all else,